As I alluded to in the last video, what we get are different groups coming in and basically taking over Egypt, invading Egypt. And one of the great ones is going to be the Greeks. And this is known as Ptolemaic Egypt. Ptolemy being the general who gets to really rule over, or be the first Greek ruler over Egypt, and then that dynasty taking on his name for about 10 generations. Now we have, as I said, various foreign occupants come to rule, but the Greeks will show up in 332. And Egypt is going to be conquered by the Macedonian Greeks under, of course, Alexander the Great. And here we see that Ptolemaic kingdom as it was left after the death of Alexander. When Alexander dies, all of the empire that he develops splits up, and it's being ruled over by different generals. In this case, we're specifically looking at Egypt, but later we'll look at some of the others. Upon his death, the ruler Ptolemy, of course, will take over Egypt, but in 30, with the death of Cleopatra, 30 BCE, with the death of Cleopatra, we will see the Romans taking control. And so here we have sort of a line of the various rulers, and we'll see some real issues if you pay attention to this line of succession, because you'll see an awful lot of people who are brother and sister getting married. Now, it should be pointed out that oftentimes what's happening, they're trying to keep the royal blood pure. But sometimes the marriage is more symbolic than anything else, and sometimes they will simply go out and adopt someone. Other times this is in fact an incestuous relationship, trying to keep the royal blood pure, which leads us to Cleopatra, who we think of as this Liz Taylor-like figure, but the coin on the right would suggest otherwise, since the Romans were really into being accurate, especially when it came to rulers. It's a concept called verism. They want to show the wisdom, they want to show a realistic depiction before the empire. And remember, she's from the time of Caesar and his great salad. She's not from the empire, and so we're getting this sort of depiction of someone who is maybe not the face that launched 1,000 ships, but then again, that's Helen of Troy or Helen of Mycenae, not Cleopatra. Leaving her aside, though, for a moment, let's talk about one of the temples from this period, the Temple of Horus at Edfu. And there's a great rebuilding program under the Greeks. Of course, they're trying to recreate the grandeur that was Egypt. And again, we have a pylon temple with this massive facade. In other words, the sloped walls of the giant, this enclosure that includes the temple within it. And they're trying to create something that would be similar to Karnak. In fact, it's on an island in the Nile, not that far from Karnak. We have a massive facade. You can see people standing in front of it. This is a huge structure. It's meant to be given a sense of awe and grandeur. And we see sunken relief sculpture carved into it, glorifying the gods Horus and Hathor, who you thought we were done with when we dealt with the Palette of Narmer, but still are associated with Egyptian unification. Here, the Greeks basically giving the idea that Egypt is unified under them, just as it was in the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. And this is an example of a Greek building being built in an Egyptian style. After all, it is very hybrid. When we look at it, those columns are far more reminiscent of Greek Doric columns, or maybe Corinthian in some ways, than they are of the typical Egyptian lotus form or reed form that we would expect to see. The construction methods are typically Greek. It's been formed to look Egyptian, but at the end of the day, the use of a colonnade, the use of a covered arcade, as we see here, is very typical of Greek architecture. So this hybridization is going to be important to keep in mind. Anything we see from the Ptolemies is not, in fact, entirely Egyptian. It's usually a hybrid of Greek and Egyptian. Later, the Romans will do much the same.